president. Let's get to Sarah Eisen, who's been, of course, on the ground in Davos all week, where this new administration and the economic outlook have dominated much of the conversation, as you said last hour, Sarah.
Oh, yes, it is all about Trump. Even if he is not here, certainly his presidency looms large. For the American CEOs who have been expressing so much optimism about what it could mean for the economy, to the European CEOs who sound a little bit more cautious, but also are hoping that some of the pro-growth policies rub off on Europe, to some of the other world leaders who are talking about tariffs and waiting to hear from President Trump in this address. Here's what we've heard on CNBC. We've been talking all week long to chief executives about what Trump coming back in means to their business and to the overall economy. Here's what they've said.
I've been here many times before, and I'm really struck by the level of optimism about the U.S. And it is around deregulation. It's around unleashing the energy market. It's around maintaining the U.S. edge on AI. And I believe in all of that. And I believe that there'll be animal spirits.
One of the key learnings for me these days has been the optimism that we see, especially in enterprise customers. I think deregulation is going to help to drive growth, and everything that will drive growth will be good for our company. So we are optimistic about the impact that some of these actions are going to be taking on the economy and on the business.
The U.S. economy is in pretty good shape, Andrew, as we head into this new administration. But I think the thing that I'm encouraged about, and as I talk to clients, I'm finding clients are really encouraged about, it seems like, and this is true in the U.S., it's true with the new administration.
From our standpoint and from my standpoint, we want this administration to succeed. When this administration succeeds, the country does well, business does well.
I think the difference is, the feeling is they're off to a much faster start this time, because they've been through it before. They have their executive orders lined up. And so I think there's a more immediacy, the reaction of the international community here saying, this stuff's coming at us right away.
And even though there was a lot more hand-wringing over tariffs the last time around, I would say, even companies like, we just spoke with Donald Tang of Shein, for instance, heavy manufacturing in China that sell into the U.S., somewhat politicized in the U.S.-China relationship. Even he was saying, look, as long as it's applied uniformly to all the companies, we'll be fine. And you're hearing a lot more sort of acceptance of tariffs, perhaps as an effective national security measure. That's something I've heard from a lot of CEOs as well. So there's just a lot more broad acceptance of Trump this time around. Remember, he came to Davos a few years ago. This time he's coming in virtually, obviously a big week, the week of the inauguration. And of course, everyone's already talking about, Carl and Leslie, whether he'll be here in person next year.
That's a good question, Sarah, and it'll be interesting to see what his remarks focus on in just a few moments' time. I'm curious if, the conversations that you're having with people behind the scene mirrors what they're saying on TV. Is it that same optimism and jubilance, or are there is there a little bit more skepticism as people are, not on the record?
I think there is that level of optimism. I would say the only thing that I hear about is, okay, well, now they have to execute. They have a pretty ambitious growth agenda. They want to lower the deficit at the same time as growing GDP. Well, those two things can be difficult, right? We know they want to impose tariffs, but also keep inflation from being too high for Americans. That's what President Trump ran on. Those two things can sometimes go in conflict. So it's about the execution of some of these policies. But I think they are very optimistic. And one reason why is because they have a seat at the table, that he has business people in government, that he is going to run this government much like a business organization, even with a department looking at cost cuts and that sort of thing. And so this is the real test of business. And we've seen, for instance, how close he is with Elon Musk, with now Mark Zuckerberg. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, the fact is businesses do have a say when it comes to making policy, and that is something they are obviously very optimistic about. Look, I would just say, as far as other world leaders, this is his first opportunity here to address the world stage here in Europe. We did have a few of them. We had the Chancellor of Germany here. We had President Zelensky of Ukraine here. We just had this morning speaking President Milei of Argentina, who is a close friend of Trump. He came from the inauguration here to Davos. It was his second time. And guess what he talked about at the World Economic Forum? Always a disruptor. He talked about the failing mental virus of woke ideology. And Milei called it the great pandemic of our time that needs to be cured. It is the cancer that must be cut out, which was sort of a good preview, I think, for for President Trump here in a few moments.
Yeah, interesting. Some of the executive orders that got revoked this week actually are not new orders related to DEI, so to speak. They go back to LBJ. On tariffs, Sarah, it's interesting. Again, we run into this collision of ideas, whether they are a revenue enhancer to pay for tax cuts or a negotiating tactic that gives you leverage over a different outcome. And it's going to be interesting to see how it can be both.
It can be both, right? They could raise money. I mean, they could raise revenue, and that's something the U.S. government needs to do right now. It's a much more old school way of doing it. That's how it used to be done, but since then it's been booming free trade and elimination of tariffs. So definitely a revenue raiser, and we all know art of the deal, negotiating tactic, but will be interesting when it comes to issues around national security, particularly around China. The other thing I'm hearing as far as the optimism that is around the business community here is that people are more optimistic about the U.S.-China relationship, which is something I haven't heard in a while. Ray Dalio was just speaking on a panel with me, and he talked about this, the fact that there's already open dialogue between Presidents Trump and Xi.
Well, thank you very much, Klaus, and hello to everyone in beautiful Davos. This has been a truly historic week in the United States. 3 days ago, I took the oath of office, and we began the golden age of America. The recent presidential election was won by millions of votes, and all seven, every one of them, all seven swing states. It was a massive mandate from the American people like hasn't been seen in many years, and some of the political pundits, even some of my so-called enemies, said it was the most consequential election victory in 129 years. That's quite nice. What the world has witnessed in the past 72 hours is nothing less than a revolution of common sense. Our country will soon be stronger, wealthier, and more united than ever before, and the entire planet will be more peaceful and prosperous as a result of this incredible momentum and what we're doing and going to do. My administration is acting with unprecedented speed to fix the disasters we've inherited from a totally inept group of people and to solve every single crisis facing our country. This begins with confronting the economic chaos caused by the failed policies of the last administration. Over the past 4 years, our government racked up $8 trillion in wasteful deficit spending and inflicted nation-wrecking energy restrictions, crippling regulations, and hidden taxes like never before. The result is the worst inflation crisis in modern history and sky-high interest rates for our citizens and even throughout the world. Food prices and the price of almost every other thing known to mankind went through the roof. President Biden totally lost control of what was going on in our country, but in particular with our high inflation economy and at our border. Because of these ruinous policies, total government spending this year is $1.5 trillion higher than was projected to occur when I left office just 4 years ago. Likewise, the cost of servicing the debt is more than 230% higher than was projected in 2020. The inflation rate we are inheriting remains 50% higher than the historic target. It was the highest inflation probably in the history of our country. That's why from the moment I took office, I've taken rapid action to reverse each and every one of these radical left policies that created this calamity, in particular with immigration, crime, and inflation. On day one, I signed an executive order directing every member of my cabinet to marshal all powers at their disposal to defeat inflation and reduce the cost of daily life. I imposed a federal hiring freeze, a federal regulation freeze, a foreign aid freeze, and I created the new Department of Government Efficiency. I terminated the ridiculous and incredibly wasteful Green New Deal. I call it the Green New Scam, withdrew from the one-sided Paris Climate Accord, and ended the insane and costly electric vehicle mandate. We're going to let people buy the car they want to buy. I declared a national energy emergency, and it's so important, national energy emergency to unlock the liquid gold under our feet and pave the way for rapid approvals of new energy infrastructure. The United States has the largest amount of oil and gas of any country on earth, and we're going to use it. Not only will this reduce the cost of virtually all goods and services, it'll make the United States a manufacturing superpower and the world capital of artificial intelligence and crypto. My administration has also begun the largest deregulation campaign in history, far exceeding even the record-setting efforts of my last term. In total, the Biden administration imposed $50,000 in additional regulatory costs on the average American household over the last 4 years. I have promised to eliminate 10 old regulations for every new regulation, which will soon put many thousands of dollars back in the pockets of American families. To further unleash our economy, our majorities in the House and Senate, which we also took along with the presidency, are going to pass the largest tax cut in American history, including massive tax cuts for workers and family, and big tax cuts for domestic producers and manufacturers. And we're working with the Democrats on getting an extension of the original Trump tax cuts, as you probably know, by just reading any paper. My message to every business in the world is very simple. Come make your product in America, and we will give you among the lowest taxes of any nation on earth. We're bringing them down very substantially, even from the original Trump tax cuts. But if you don't make your product in America, which is your prerogative, then very simply you will have to pay a tariff, differing amounts, but a tariff which will direct hundreds of billions of dollars and even trillions of dollars into our treasury to strengthen our economy and pay down debt. Under the Trump administration, there will be no better place on earth to create jobs, build factories, or grow a company than right here in the good old USA. Already Americans' economic, you can see this, I think, maybe even in your wonderful, wonderful room that you're all gathered together, so many of my friends, but Americans, the economic confidence is soaring like we haven't seen in many, many decades, maybe not at all. Upon my election, it was just announced that small business optimism skyrocketed by 41 points in a single month. That's the highest ever. There's never been anything like that. SoftBank has announced between a $100 and $200 billion investment in the U.S. economy because of the election result. And just 2 days ago, Oracle, SoftBank, and OpenAI announced a $500 billion investment in AI infrastructure. Other companies likewise have announced billions and billions and billions, adding up to trillions of investment in America, in the United States. And it's also reported today in the papers that Saudi Arabia will be investing at least $600 billion in America, but I'll be asking the Crown Prince, who's a fantastic guy, to round it out to around $1 trillion. I think they'll do that because we've been very good to them. And I'm also going to ask Saudi Arabia and OPEC to bring down the cost of oil. You got to bring it down, which frankly, I'm surprised they didn't do before the election. That didn't show a lot of love by them not doing it. I was a little surprised by that. If the price came down, the Russia-Ukraine war would end immediately. Right now, the price is high enough that that war will continue. You got to bring down the oil price. You got to end that war. They should have done it long ago. They're very responsible, actually, to a certain extent for what's taking place. Millions of lives are being lost. With oil prices going down, I'll demand that interest rates drop immediately, and likewise, they should be dropping all over the world. Interest rates should follow us. All over, the progress that you're seeing is happening because of our historic victory in a recent presidential election, one that has become quite well known throughout the world. I think a lot of things are happening to a lot of countries. They say that there's light shining all over the world since the election, and even countries that we aren't particularly friendly with are happy because they understand what there is a future and how great the future will be. Under our leadership, America is back and open for business. And this week, I'm also taking swift action to stop the invasion at our southern border. They allowed people to come in at levels that nobody's ever seen before. It was ridiculous. I decided and declared to do, and very, very importantly, a national emergency on our border, immediately halted all entry of illegal border crossers, of which there were many, and began promptly returning the illegal trespassers back to the place from which they came. That action, as you've probably seen, has already started very strongly. I've deployed active duty U.S. military and National Guard troops to the border to assist in repelling the invasion. It was really an invasion. We will not allow our territory to be violated. After 4 long years, the United States is strong and sovereign and a beautiful nation. Once again, it's a strong, sovereign nation. In addition, I'm pleased to report that America is also a free nation once again. On day one, I signed an executive order to stop all government censorship. No longer will our government label the speech of our own citizens as misinformation or disinformation, which are the favorite words of censors and those who wish to stop the free exchange of ideas and, frankly, progress. We have saved free speech in America, and we've saved it strongly. With another historic executive order this week, I also ended the weaponization of law enforcement against the American people and, frankly, against politicians, and restored the fair, equal, and impartial rule of law. My administration has taken action to abolish all discriminatory diversity, equity, and inclusion nonsense. And these are policies that were absolute nonsense throughout the government and the private sector. With the recent yet somewhat unexpected great Supreme Court decision just made, America will once again become a merit-based country. You have to hear that word, merit-based country. And I've made it official, an official policy of the United States, that there are only 2 genders, male and female. And we will have no men participating in women's sports, and transgender operations, which became the rage, will occur very rarely. Finally, as we restore common sense in America, we're moving quickly to bring back strength and peace and stability abroad. I'm also going to ask all NATO nations to increase defense spending to 5% of GDP, which is what it should have been years ago. It was only at 2%, and most nations didn't pay until I came along. I insisted that they pay, and they did, because the United States was really paying the difference at that time, and it was unfair to the United States. But many, many things have been unfair for many years to the United States. Before even taking office, my team negotiated a ceasefire agreement in the Middle East, which wouldn't have happened without us, as I think most of the people in the room know. Earlier this week, the hostages began to return to their families. They are returning, and it's a beautiful sight, and they'll be coming in more and more. They started coming back on Sunday. Our efforts to secure a peace settlement between Russia and Ukraine are now hopefully underway. It's so important to get that done. That is an absolute killing field. Millions of soldiers are being killed. Nobody's seen anything like it since World War II. They're laying dead all over the flat fields. It's a flat field farmland, and there's millions of Russians and millions of Ukrainians. Nobody's seen anything like it since World War II. It's time to end it. And here in America, we have big events coming up. Next year, we have the 250th anniversary of America's founding. I'm so honored to be president during that. That's been a big event. They've been talking about it for 10 years. We also have the World Cup, and I understand Gianni's in the room. Infantino, he was very instrumental in helping us get it. He's there with you someplace, I think, and I want to thank him for that. And then we have the Olympics coming up, which I was instrumental in getting also in my first term. And who would have known that by skipping a term, I would get the Olympics? I was upset. I said, you know, I got the Olympics to come and I won't be president. But it turned out through a stroke of luck, or whatever you might call it, that I'm going to be president during the World Cup and the Olympics and the 250th anniversary. So that's going to be 3 big events. And we've accomplished more in less than 4 days. We have really been working 4 days than other administrations have accomplished in 4 years, and we're just getting started. It's really an amazing thing to see, and the spirit and the light over our country has been incredible. Under the last administration, our nation has suffered greatly, but we're going to bring it back and make it greater, bigger, stronger, better than ever before. I want to thank everybody for being with you. I would have been there myself, except the inauguration was 2 days ago. I thought it might be a little bit quick to make it the first stop. But we'll get there one day. We hope to get there. But I do appreciate, I heard the audience is fantastic, and many of my friends are in the audience. And I will be taking questions now from some very distinguished people. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. President, for that very powerful speech. And I think you could hear the applause all the way from Davos to the White House. But next year it will be even better, because then you can get the applause here in Davos. So we wish you welcome to our village next year. We hope to see you.
Thank you very much.
So we also know, Mr. President, that you open up for interaction here. We have a great panel with some of the most distinguished business people in the world. Let me start with someone that you know really well, that I think is almost a neighbor of you in Florida. Mr. Steve Schwartzman, Chairman, CEO, and co-founder of Blackstone Group. So, Steve, floor is yours.
Well, Mr. President, I'm sure the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia will be really glad you gave this speech today. You've had the busiest 4 days that anybody can imagine, and congratulations for that. My question is about some of the things I've observed here at Davos. It's a terrific forum. I've met lots of people, as usual. I think I've been here 30 years. And a lot of the European business people have expressed enormous frustration with the regulatory regime in the EU. And they attribute slower growth rates here because of numerous factors, but especially because of regulations. And you've taken a completely different approach in this area. And if you could explain the theory of what you're doing, how you're going to do it, and what you expect the outcome to be, I'd appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much, and congratulations, Steve. You're a friend of mine, but on a great career. You have had an amazing career, and it continues. I just want to congratulate you. Very inspirational to a lot of people. I want to talk about the EU, because you mentioned specifically that I have also had a lot of friends and leaders of countries. I've gotten to know them all my first term and a little bit during this period of 4 years, and know them well, like them a lot, but they're very frustrated because of the time everything seems to take to get approved, environmental impact statements for things that you shouldn't even have to do that, and many, many other ways that it takes. And I'm going to give you a quick little example. In the private life, my beautiful private life, before I had all these things happening, the world is a little different. I had a nice, simple life. You knew that. But when I had that simple life, I did projects. And I had a big project in Ireland. And it had to get approval on something that would have made it even better. And I got the approval from Ireland in a period of a week. And it was a very, very efficient, good approval. And they informed me, though, the problem is you're going to have to get it from the EU, and we think that'll take 5 to 6 years. And I said, you have to be kidding. And this was before politics. And I said, wait a minute, it's not that important. I don't want to go 5 or 6 years, but it would have been a big investment. It would have been nice, and it would have been good for the project. And I sent the people to the EU to see if they could speed it up, and basically it was a 5 or 6 year wait just to get a simple approval that Ireland gave me in a period of literally not much more than a week. And I realized right then, that was the first time I really was involved with the EU, but I realized right then that's a problem, and I didn't even bother applying to do it. And or if I did, I pulled it very quickly. I have to be very accurate because I don't want to be criticized. He did apply, actually. No, I want to be very accurate. So I don't think I did, but if I did, I pulled it very quickly. It was just something you couldn't wait 5 years or 6 years to get an approval. So a lot of, in a very big business sense, a lot of people are claiming that's the problem. From the standpoint of America, the EU treats us very, very unfairly, very badly. They have a large tax that we know about, and a VAT tax, and it's a very substantial one. They don't take our, essentially don't take our farm products, and they don't take our cars, yet they send cars to us by the millions. They put tariffs on things that we want to do. Like, for instance, I think they actually, in terms of, these are non-economic or non-monetary tariffs, and those are very bad, and they make it very difficult to bring products into Europe, and yet they expect to be selling, and they do sell their products in the United States. So we have, you know, hundreds of billions of dollars of deficits with the EU. And nobody's happy with it, and we're going to do something about it, but nobody's happy with it. So I think the EU has to speed up their process. Friends of mine that are in some of the nations within the EU, great people, they want to be able to compete better, and you can't compete when you can't go through the approval process fast. There's no reason why it can't go faster. So, you know, I'm trying to be constructive because I love Europe. I love the countries of Europe, but the process is a very cumbersome one. And they do treat the United States of America very, very unfairly with the VAT taxes and all of the other taxes they impose. One other, just to finish up, I got a call from the head of a major airline, one of the biggest airlines in the world, and he said, "Sir, could you help us? What? Landing in Europe is brutal. They charge us fees for everything, and it's so unfair." I said, "How does it compare to China?" He said, it's much worse. And the other thing, as you know, they took court cases with Apple, and they supposedly won a case that most people didn't think was much of a case. They won 15 or 16 billion from Apple. They won billions from Google. I think they're after Facebook for billions and billions. These are American companies, whether you like them or not. They're American companies, and they shouldn't be doing that. And that's, as far as I'm concerned, it's a form of taxation. So we have some very big complaints with the EU. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We'll now go to one of your friends in the EU, Patrick Pouyanné. He's the chairman CEO of Total Energies. I guess you have a question ready, Patrick, for the president.
Mr. President, as we understand, energy is at the top of your agenda, and it's an honor for me to represent the energy industry tonight in this panel. Total Energies is indeed the fourth largest oil and gas and electricity company in the world. I will not ask you a question about the oil price. It's quite clear what you expect from us. I will go to gas more. And our company is the largest #1 exporter LNG from the US company. We are a strong contributor to, and we invest in a mammoth LNG projects in Texas, $20 billion. It's far from 200, but it's $20 billion. And we contribute with that to security of supply to Europe, as we export this LNG to Europe. Some experts fear that if there are too many projects developed in the US on LNG, this could have an inflationary impact on the US domestic gas price. And they recommend a pause on these projects. I would ask you the following question: what are your views about such a pause on investments on LNG in the US? What would happen if you would observe an increased domestic gas price because of these exports? And final question, which is important for Europe: would you agree to guarantee security of supplies of US LNG to Europe?
Well, in the last part of your question, yes, I would. I would make sure that you get it. If we make a deal, we make a deal, you'll get it. because a lot of people do have that problem. They make a deal and then it can't get supplied because of war-type problems and other problems. So we would absolutely do that. LNG is very interesting because when I took office for the first term, one of the first things I looked at was there were two very massive plants in Louisiana, a state that has been very good to me, won it by many, many points. And I felt strongly indebted to it, actually. And they said there are two plants that have been under environmental consideration for more than 10 years. And they were costing, as you say, you know how expensive those plants are, but they were costing like 12 billion and I think 14 or 15 billion, but they couldn't get their permits. They were in review for years, many, many years, like a decade or more. And I said, so ridiculous. I know so much about that because in the construction industry, I had to go through it too, but I got good at it after a while. But I saw the projects, and you're talking about a total investment of 25 to $30 billion, and it looked like it was going to end. They couldn't get their permits, and I got them done in less than a week. It was done, completed. In fact, when they called them to announce that it was done, the countries, largely countries, Japan was involved and another country and some very big investors, they couldn't believe it. They actually couldn't believe it. And I said, just do yourself one favor. Don't pay any consultants, because the only one that got it done was me. I got it done because it was the right thing to do for the U.S. and for the world, but the consultants had nothing to do with it. You know, the consultants go in and they say, give us millions of dollars because Trump did it. Nobody called me about it. I just heard it was a problem for years. And I got it done because it was the right thing to do for the U.S. and the right thing to do for beyond. It had to do with energy, very important. So I think it's very important. I think I disagree with one. I think the more that you do, the lower the price is going to go. And what I'd like to see is rapid approvals. We're going to give very rapid approvals in the United States, like with the AI plants, talking to many people want to build them. That's going to be a very big thing. We're going to build electric generating facilities. They are going to build. I'm going to get them the approval. Under emergency declaration, I can get the approvals done myself without having to go through years of waiting. And the big problem is we need double the energy we currently have in the United States. Can you imagine? For AI to really be as big as we want to have it, because it's a very competitive, it'll be very competitive with China and others. So I'm going to give emergency declarations so that they can start building them almost immediately. And I think it was largely my idea because nobody thought this was possible. It wasn't that they were not smart, because they're the smartest, but I told them that what I want you to do is build your electric generating plant right next to your plant as a separate building connected. And they said, wow, you're kidding. And I said, no, I'm not kidding. You don't have to hook into the grid, which is old and, could be taken out. If it's taken out, they wouldn't have any way to get any electricity. So we are going to allow them to go on a very rapid basis to build their plant, build the electric generating plant. They can fuel it with anything they want, and they may have coal as a backup, good, clean coal, If there were a problem with a pipe coming in, as an example, you're going with gas, oil or gas, and a pipe gets blown up or for some reason doesn't work, there are some companies in the U.S. that have coal sitting right by the plant so that if there's an emergency, they can go to that short-term basis and use our very clean coal. So that's something else that a lot of people didn't even know about, but nothing can destroy coal, not the weather, not a bomb, nothing. It might make it a little smaller, might make it a little different shape, but coal is very strong as a backup. It's a great backup to have that facility, and it wouldn't cost much more money. And we have more coal than anybody. We also have more oil and gas than anybody. So we're going to make it so that the plants will have their own electric generating facilities attached right to their plant. They don't have to worry about a utility. They don't have to worry about anything. And we're going to get very rapid approvals.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. President. We'll now go to another CEO that you know very well, Brian Moynihan, the CEO and Chair of Bank of America.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, and congratulations, and obviously eventful week for you and your family. If you remember 5 years ago, you came here and we walked among 150 CEOs from all over the world and you engaged with them about your policies and your procedures. This year you're not here, and yet this week was eventful from the orders that you mentioned earlier, literally a wave of orders coming out on immigration, on trade, and many other matters. And so as a representative of the United States here, we got a lot of questions about what does all this mean and how would the president square this with his clear focus on growth, prosperity, market growth, stock market growth, a good bond market, and bringing down prices. So how do you think about the impact of all these orders and how fast they come out and how you're going to balance them with that scorecard of being successful in both continuing GDP growth, bringing down inflation, and also having a good stock price appreciation for the American citizen?
Well, I think it's going to actually bring down inflation. It's going to bring up jobs. We're going to have a lot of jobs. We're going to have a lot of companies moving in. You know, Brian, we're at 21%. It was at 40%, and I got it down to 21%, the corporate tax. And it was actually, if you look at state and city, it was in many cases much higher than 40%. I got it down to 21%. And now we're going to bring it down from 21 to 15% if, there's a big if you make your product in the U.S. So we're going to have the lowest, just about the lowest rate. It'll be, the 21 is on the low side worldwide. The 15 is about as low as it gets, and by far the lowest of a large country, a large, you know, rich, powerful country by far, not even a contest. So we're going to bring it down to 15% if you make your product in the USA. So that's going to create a tremendous buzz. We're also probably going back to the one-year deduction where we deduct, you know, we did that originally, and that was amazing what the impact that had, the one-year deduction, which built up over a period of time, and then it expires. But we're going to go back to that when we do the renewal of the Trump tax plan. We have to get Democrats to approve it. But, you know, if the Democrats didn't approve it, I don't know how they can survive with about a 45% tax increase, because that's what it would be. And so I think they're going to do. We've been working along with them pretty well. I think it's very hard for a political group to say, let's charge people 45% more. So I think we're in good shape, but we're actually doing a reduction for business and small businesses where you're going to bring it down to 15%, which is really something. And by the way, speaking of you, and you've done a fantastic job, but I hope you start opening your bank to conservatives, because many conservatives complain that the banks are not allowing them to do business within the bank, and that included a place called Bank of America. They don't take conservative business. And I don't know if the regulators mandated that because of Biden or what, but you and Jamie and everybody, I hope you're going to open your banks to conservatives, because what you're doing is wrong.
Mr. President, I'll say that your friend Gianni said hello, told me to tell you hello, and we look forward to sponsoring the World Cup when it comes, both this summer for the club and next year. So thank you for getting that for the United States.
Thank you very much, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. President. We'll now go to Ana Abutin. She's the executive chairman of Banco Santander, one of the big European banks, and also in the U.S. So, Ana.
Mr. President, congratulations on a historic victory. I believe you don't know me as well as my fellow panelists, so a few words. Santander is one of the largest banks in the world by number of customers, 170 million. That's more than my friend Brian or my friend Jamie have. And those...
They fixed the regulation.
That's coming, that's coming.
That was cheeky.
We're a big investor in the United States. We have many million customers, 12,000 employees. We're one of the largest auto lenders. And we recently launched a fully digital bank called Open Bank. We strongly believe banks have a pivotal role in the economy, and we can accelerate growth and help many more customers. That's what we're doing in the United States. So, as Brian pointed out, we very much welcome your focus on deregulation and reducing bureaucracy. So my question is, what are your priorities in this regard, and how fast is this going to happen? Thank you very much.
I think it's going to, thank you and congratulations. I know very much about your bank, and you've done a fantastic job. Congratulations. We are going to move very quickly. We've moved very quickly. We've done things in the last 3 days that nobody thought were possible to do in years. And it's all taking effect. It's going to have a huge impact on the economy, a huge positive impact. Money was being wasted on crazy things. I mean, the Green New Deal was such a total disgrace, how that was perpetrated. And it was conceived of by people that were average students, less than average students, I might add, and never even took a course in energy or the environment. It was just a game. Remember, the world was going to end in 12 years? Remember that? Well, the 12 years has come and gone. It was going to end. It was going to all foam into earth. But, you know, the time has come. These people, and they really scared the Democrats large. I can't say the Republicans. The Republicans maybe could have fought harder to stop it, but it's been a tremendous waste of money. You know, during my 4 years, we had the cleanest air, we had the cleanest water, and yet we had the most productive economy in the history of our country. We had the most productive economy. Until COVID came, we had the most productive in the history of our country by far. And actually, you can look worldwide. We were beating everybody from China to everybody else. So, and we think we really now, with what we have learned and all of the other things that have taken place, we think we can even far surpass that, actually far, far surpass it. But we do, one thing we're going to be demanding is we're going to be demanding respect from other nations. Canada, we have a tremendous deficit with Canada. We're not going to have that anymore. We can't do it. I don't know if it's good for them. As you probably know, I say you can always become a state. And if you're a state, we won't have a deficit. We won't have to tariff you, et cetera, et cetera. But Canada has been very tough to deal with over the years. And it's not fair that we should have a $200 billion or $250 billion deficit. We don't need them to make our cars, and they make a lot of them. We don't need their lumber because we have our own forests, et cetera, et cetera. We don't need their oil and gas. We have more than anybody. So, you know, just as an example, with Mexico, we're dealing with Mexico, I think, very well. And we're just, you know, we just want to be treated fairly with other nations, because there's hardly a nation in the world, and I blame this on us, and I blame it on politicians that, for some reason, probably mostly it's stupidity, but you could also say other reasons, but mostly stupidity. They've allowed other nations to take advantage of the U.S., and we can't allow that to happen anymore. You know, we have debt. It's a very small debt when you compare it to the value of the assets that we have, but we don't want to do that. We want to just have debt be obliterated, and we'll be able to do that fairly rapidly. And a lot of good things are going to happen. And honestly, good things are going to happen for the world, and good things are going to happen for the people that are dealing with us, allies and beyond allies. One thing very important, I really would like to be able to meet with President Putin soon and get that war ended. And that's not from the standpoint of economy or anything else. It's from the standpoint of millions of lives are being wasted. Beautiful young people are being shot in the battlefield. You know, the bullet, very flat land, as I said, and the bullet goes, there's no hiding, and a bullet, the only thing going to stop the bullet is a human body. And you have to see, I've seen pictures of what's taken place. It's a carnage, and we really have to stop that war. That war is horrible. And I'm not talking economy. I'm not talking economics. I'm not talking about natural resource. I'm just talking about there's so many young people being killed in this war, and that's not including the people that have been killed as the cities are being, you know, knocked down building by building. So we really should get that stopped. Likewise, in the Middle East, I think we've made a lot of progress in the Middle East, and I think that's gonna come along pretty well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. We know that the most consequential relationship in the world is between the U.S. and China. U.S. 28% of the global economy, China close to 20%. That's almost half of the global GDP. And we know that you called President Xi Jinping last Friday. We heard that you had a good discussion. How do you see the relationship between the U.S. and China in the next 4 years under your leadership?
He called me, but I see it very good. I think that we're going to have a very good relationship. All we want is fairness. We just want a level playing field. We don't want to take advantage. We've been having massive deficits with China. Biden allowed it to get out of hand. He's $1.1 trillion deficit. It's ridiculous. And it's just an unfair relationship. And we have to make it just fair. We don't have to make it phenomenal. We have to make it a fair relationship. Right now, it's not a fair relationship. The deficit is massive, as it is with other countries, a lot of Asian countries, actually. But we have deficits that are very big, and we can't keep doing that. So we're not going to keep doing that. But I like President Xi very much. I've always liked him. We always had a very good relationship. It was very strained with COVID coming out of Wuhan. Obviously, that strained it. I'm sure it strained it with a lot of people, but that strained our relationship. But we always had a great relationship, I would say, and we look forward to doing very well with China and getting along with China. Hopefully, China can help us stop the war with, in particular, Russia, Ukraine. They have a great deal of power over that situation, and we'll work with them. And I mentioned that during our phone conversation with President Xi, and hopefully we could work together and get that stopped. We'd like to see denuclearization. In fact, with President Putin, prior to an election result, which was frankly ridiculous, we were talking about denuclearization of our two countries, and China would have come along. China has a much smaller right now nuclear armament than us, or field than us, but they're going to be catching it at some point over the next 4 or 5 years. And I will tell you that President Putin really liked the idea of cutting way back on nuclear, and I think the rest of the world, we would have gotten them to follow, and China would have come along too. China also liked it. Tremendous amounts of money are being spent on nuclear, and the destructive capability is something that we don't even want to talk about today because you don't want to hear it. It's too depressing. So we want to see if we can denuclearize, and I think that's very possible. And I can tell you that President Putin wanted to do it. He and I wanted to do it. We had a good conversation with China. They would have been involved, and that would have been an unbelievable thing for the planet.
Mr. President, when you're back here in Davos next year, will there be then a peace agreement with Ukraine and Russia by then?
Well, you're going to have to ask Russia. Ukraine is ready to make a deal. Just so you understand, this is a war that should have never started. If I were president, it would never have started. This is a war that should have never, ever been started. And it wasn't started during there was never even talk about it. I knew that it was the apple of President Putin's eye, but I also knew that there was no way he was going in, and he wasn't going to go in. And then when I was out, bad things happened, bad things were said, a lot of stupidity all around, and you end up with what you have. Now you have all these bombed out cities. They look like demolition sites with many people killed. I think the thing that you'll see about Ukraine is that far more people have died than is being reported. And I've seen that. But far, far more people have died. When you look at a city that's become a demolition site where big buildings have been collapsed by missiles hitting them and everything else, and they say one person was slightly injured. No, many people were killed. Those are big buildings. I was surprised at how that was my business. These are buildings that go 2 and 3 blocks long. They're 20 stories high. They're big, powerful buildings, and they were knocked down, and there were a lot of people in those buildings. That announced that 2 people were injured. That's not true. So I think you're going to find that there were many more people killed in Ukraine in the Ukraine war than anybody has any idea. But if you look now, so many of the people being killed are soldiers just facing each other with guns, rifles, and drones, the new form of warfare, drones. And it's a very sad thing to see. And when you see pictures of the fields that I see, nobody wants to see it. You'll never be the same.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, on behalf of all the 3,000 participants here in Davos. We really underline that joining us the third day in your presidency, live taking questions here is so appreciated, and we are already ready for receiving you next year in person. So thank you very much, and all the best from Davos.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
That is the president virtually addressing business leaders in Davos, touching on a number of topics, energy, reassuring the world on LNG supply, endorsing coal, talking taxes, the Middle East, Russia, saying he wants to obliterate U.S. debt. But Sarah Eisen, who's been watching in Davos, maybe one of the key headlines is this line, we will demand that interest rates drop immediately, and likewise, they should be dropping all over the world.
Yes, I noted that one too. I'm not sure how much you can do about that. That's the Federal Reserve's purview, but they have been dropping, and certainly the Federal Reserve has been lowering interest rates as well. We've got a great person to get reaction to this speech and some of what we heard from President Trump. Joining me now is Moelis & Company's Ken Moelis. He, a longtime investment banker, manages funds, advisory services. Good to have you. He came from the inauguration straight to Davos. He's been a backer of President Trump during the election. What do you think about what we heard?
Well, it's interesting. I think you asked me to come by. Maybe I could help interpret. I said, there's no interpretation needed. The good news is it was spelled out. I think the agenda was pretty well spelled out, black and white, short, sharp statements. And what's interesting is I was thinking about, the U.S. is a $30 trillion business. And when you ask the CEO of a business of that size, what they can do is lay out direction, big picture direction. You can't get into every detail. And if you listen to that speech and you didn't understand what the goals were, you're missing it. They were clear, they were consistent, and they were pretty broad brush and direct.
Also, he gave a little bit of hints as what he wants to do. So he wants interest rates around the world to come down. Another one that I noted was OPEC. First of all, he did say, according to the reports, that Saudi Arabia would be investing $600 billion into the U.S. He said he's going to ask them to increase it to $1 trillion. He's going to ask the Crown Prince for that. And he's going to ask OPEC to bring down the price of oil. And he said if the price of oil came down, then the Russian war would end, and also pointed the finger at them and gave some responsibility to OPEC for keeping oil prices high. I mean, some of this stuff isn't fully in his control, but I do wonder if he can make a big difference.
Well, first of all, if you don't ask, you don't get. And I think Trump, why not? Why not ask for things? I think what he was getting at with Saudi, first of all, I think Saudi announced ahead of the speech that they were going to invest $600 billion. I thought I saw that on the news this morning.
Correct.
So that was out there.
Saudi reports, yeah.
And I think what he was getting at with the war is, look, Russia is an oil-based economy, and he was probably thinking, you drop the price, you stop the funding of the economy. I think that's where he was going with that. But again, if you don't ask, look, he's a businessman, he's an aggressive businessman, and all these asking interest rates to go down is very difficult. There's no central source of interest rates. Well, there is the Federal Reserve on short rates, but even the Federal Reserve doesn't control.
But I feel like the market's
rates.
been on high alert for some sort of encroachment on the Federal Reserve's independence, though he has said before he's going to leave Powell alone. So those kind of comments raise questions.
Again, I think setting a direction, telling people what you'd like to happen. So far, we haven't seen the encroachment, but I know what he's doing. I think he's just telling people what he'd like to do. And by the way, a lot of companies are responding to what he said he would like before he's had to take
They're
action.
preempting.
They're preempting. So
I mean, all these announcements that he mentioned with SoftBank, 100 to 200 billion, the $500 billion Stargate announcement on AI infrastructure from Larry Ellison and Sam Altman and Masa-san.
Well, I think, look, it's actually very smart if you set out some goals and people want to preempt your goals and don't even make you do what you've been asking for. They just do it ahead of time. That's pretty good. I think most business people in the world would say, yeah, I'd like that. I'd like if I asked my clients to do something, they just did it. It'd be very good.
It was sort of fascinating to see the reactions and the interactions between some of the CEOs that were invited to ask questions on stage. Seem to have a relationship. Obviously, Steve Schwartzman, who he's known a long time. But how about that sort of awkward one with Bank of America CEO Brian Moynihan, who asked a question about the economic agenda, and then President Trump at the end accused him specifically of denying banking to conservatives and said, what you're doing is wrong. I hope you're going to open your bank to conservatives. And I thought Moynihan was going to respond to that, and he didn't.
Well, look, you'll have to ask Brian that question. Maybe he didn't hear it. I don't know what the audio in that room was exactly.
Yeah.
But again, this is Trump setting a direction. He feels that there was an imposition on conservatives through, he made a statement that the return of free speech. Well, last I looked, freedom of speech is in the First Amendment. But I think Trump's point was there seemed to be some bias on who got free speech.
And this has been a political issue. Some of the state attorneys general are suing or looking at suing.
Right. So I think I think he took that moment. And again, you have to ask Brian about whether he heard it and what the reaction was. But he was taking that moment to send a message that you cannot treat conservatives different in the country. And I think he said it. He thinks he got treated different in lots of different ways. And I believe one of those was suppression of speech. This whole idea of misinformation, it seemed a lot of misinformation was conservative information. And I think he's, again, setting the agenda, telling people where he wants the world to go.
And also, I thought it was interesting that, and I said this ahead of it, that one of the discussion points has been here, optimism around Europe, that some of these policies, especially deregulation, would rub off on Europe and European policies and set them on a new trajectory. It's something that Schwartzman asked him about, and he confirmed some of his own experience as a businessman on how long it takes to get permits to build in the EU, and encouraged, obviously, Europe. Does that make it more attractive investment destination?
I think one of the geniuses, one of the best things Trump does is he gets momentum. Think of the momentum that's going on. Think of everybody talking about the optimism. By the way, I would guess that less than 50% of the optimistic businessmen here were Trump supporters prior to the election. So it's interesting that there's optimism, and yet they might have been on the other side of the election, because I think he has this incredible ability to throw a party, to sort of have people think they're missing an invitation to what is a party. And the party is momentum, a growing economy.
Lower taxes.
The whole thing. And I think what he's doing is saying to the EU, join us, deregulate.
Yeah, also went after them for unfair trade practices, which he has done before.
Go back to energy policy that is pro. I think the heating bills in the EU are significantly higher than in the U.S., and it's all regulatory and what he would call, green initiatives that don't respond to the people's needs to have cheap energy.
So final minute, Ken. This is a question for Ken, the investor. You've heard the optimism. I've heard the optimism. Every single CEO here, closed doors, open doors, the warm reception. Everybody's excited about these pro-growth policies. Does that say something about how much is priced in and the fact that stocks are at a record high right now? And does that tell you something about what you should be doing as an investor?
Well, it's a good question, except that the election was not certain up until the moment it happened, right? A lot of people thought it was going to be close. And the market hasn't changed that much on valuation since that day. And I'll say this, I've never seen an economy, Milei spoke today and you see what's happening in Argentina. I have not seen an economy that deregulated, went for low-cost energy, and opened up freedom of activity that didn't accelerate and do well. How well, we'll see. But I haven't seen one economy in the world that didn't go in that direction.
In other words, you don't bet against it. You don't take the other side of the trade.
You could say some of it might be priced in or not. I'm not going to debate that. But don't bet against an economy that's deregulating, going for cheap energy, and operating in the best interests of its citizens. I think it'll be a good 4 years for the average worker in the United States.
Well, Ken, we're so lucky to have you to wrap up some of the Davos coverage here, and certainly from the president. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ken Moelis of Moelis & Company. And guys, I'll just leave you with the fact that I was here 5 years ago when President Trump came to the World Economic Forum, and people were a little bit more nervous around some of his policies. It was a little bit more contentious around things like tariffs and calling out Europe. Much warmer and more excited reaction this time around.
We will see. Early days. One thing is for sure, market did hold gains during the speech, and the two-year yield did come in on those comments about rates.
Oil, too, on the OPEC comments, as well as looking to bring down oil prices, took a bit of a dip during that conversation as well.
Even the VIX below 15. Interesting market reaction as we continue to weigh corporate earnings, which will be the story certainly next week as we move into some big tech. Let's get to Post 9 and the Judge.
All right, guys, thanks so much. Welcome to the Halftime Report. I'm Scott Wapner. Front and center this hour, the battle over the broadening. The Dow at a 6-week high. Tech on fire lately. We will debate the best way to play this bull market. Plus discuss President Trump's comments just a few moments ago to that crowd in Davos. Joining me for the hour today, Josh Brown, Jenny Harrington, and Bill Baruch. We are all here at Post 9 at the New York Stock Exchange. We're holding gains here. Dow's up 0.5%. S&P's positive 2%. NASDAQ giving a little bit back today. But I do want to begin, Josh, with some of the commentary that we just heard from the president, really making the case for America on the global stage. And those that he was addressing talked about economic confidence in this country, quote, soaring like never before. The things that we've heard before about his agenda in terms of re-upping the tax cuts, deregulation, investment in the United States, asking the Saudis and OPEC to cut oil prices, doubling AI energy production. All of this is why, to some degree, investors have been as optimistic as they are about where the stock market can go.
There's no question it's a vibe shift. And you're faced with two choices here as an investor. You can be cynical about it because your politics are different than the president's and you don't like every single thing on the agenda, or you don't like Pete Hegseth or whatever. You could do that. Or you can say, hey, clearly this vibe shift is going to lead to an increase in M&A activity, maybe an increase in IPOs coming to market, maybe an increase in companies thinking bigger, maybe better relations with international powers versus worse, given the way that we know President Trump likes to personalize the negotiations. You just heard him talking about his relationship with President Xi. So just be open-minded, regardless of your politics, and look at the market reaction, not over the election, but over the comments that have been made just in the last 48 hours. We're starting the week, small caps up 4% on the year. The S&P is up just under 2%. So you've got leadership in the types of stocks that have been left behind. They're basically neck and neck right now. And I think the Russell, being as strong as it's been, I think it's meaningful. Look at the small business owner optimism in all the surveys and just think beyond whatever the politics of the moment are to people being willing to take risk again, do more, consider mergers, consider corporate transactions that would have been impossible even 3 months ago. I want to talk financials really quickly as well, because they're starting to feel the momentum also once again. In the first couple of weeks of January, 0% of the financial sector within the S&P 500 was above its 20-day moving average. That's changed. They have just exploded again. 79% of the names in the financial sector are above the short-term 20-day moving average. Less than 5% of the index was above the 50. Now that's 53%. So you're seeing within one of the most economically important sectors a renewed sense of momentum. And again, it's not election related. It's new. It's based on comments that we've been hearing in just the past couple of days about the administration following through on what they said they wanted to do.
All right, Jenny, it's a good segue to the conversation that I really wanted to have, which is this battle over the broadening. As Wolf Research today comes out on small caps specifically, as Josh was just documenting the activity in the Russell 2000 and saying they could go on a massive run. Entering the year, we thought small caps had a great shot to outperform. They stick with that call. Needs to get over the highs. There's resistance at 2450. You take that out, and you could be off to the races in that part of the market that we finally get maybe the most acute sign of the broadening that many have been calling for.
I think so. I think it's so interesting, too, when we're talking about the broadening, just to like really put numbers around it. You've got S&P up 3.5. You've got Russell up 3.3. Dow and NASDAQ both like 3.8, 3.6. So it really is like everyone's winning this year. And when we talk about small caps specifically, this is something I've been really hooked on, frankly, since the third quarter of last year. But when you look out to earnings growth this year, what you see is you see the large cap growth companies, S&P 500, are expected to grow earnings by about 15% this year over last year. And it's really consistent quarter by quarter. You see like 15 to kind of 17% growth, I think 12% in the middle. But when you look at small caps, you see that growth rate accelerate wildly into year end. So by the time you get to the second, third, and fourth quarters, you see year-over-year growth rates of like 50% for small cap. And I think that's where it takes off. But we really need to see it happen. And so when we look at those returns that are all clumped together in that 3.5% range, I think people are still a little sitting on the sidelines in the small cap and saying, like, you really need to show this to me. I really need to see those earnings reports. When I think about the broadening too, I think, I don't think that the broadening needs to come at the expense of anything. So we've got the rich valuation companies like the mega cap tech, but the thing is they're still going to have earnings growth and they have fabulous fundamentals underlying them. You look at the cheaper valuations like small cap, value, anything mid cap, they're cheaper, they're not cheap to history. They also, for a nice change, have lovely fundamentals underlying them. And beneath all of that, you've got an economy that's chugging along, a consumer that's chugging along. So I really do think, Scott, I really do think the broadening is real, but I don't think it necessarily means rotation. I don't think anyone crumbles as something else takes off.
Phil Baruch, on this note, you bought more of the small cap ETF, the RSP. You're playing for the broadening?
Absolutely. In our diversified portfolios, 80-20, 60-40, we have a sleeve. It's 10% of the entire portfolio where we're tactical with ETFs. We trim some other ETFs. We hold about 3 to 5 in there on average. We'll get to that, but the IJR we increased. In RSP, they're each about 40% now to couple with IVV, which is the S&P. We're broadening our exposure as a very tactical play, and we think that's going to continue here. If you look back, I mean, the Mag 7, the big tech names, had a huge move in the fourth quarter. And I think it's time for some of those industrials, financials, as Josh highlighted, to really start making some moves here and lead the market maybe for the next couple of months.
Let's talk about the financials more specifically for a moment, because a lot of pickup from Davos at the very moment here has to do with a comment that President Trump made to Bank of America CEO Brian Moynihan, in which he was talking about opening his bank more to conservatives, suggesting that Moynihan and others within this industry have not been doing such. Quote, "I hope you're going to open your banks to conservatives because what you're doing is wrong." That is what Donald Trump, the president, has said to Brian Moynihan right on the stage there at Davos. I mean, look, we've seen sort of this kind of stuff before in terms of a president who at times can be heavy on hyperbole and light on specifics. So I'm not exactly sure what that comment is regarding. There's some suggestion that maybe he's talking about debanking related to crypto. Your guess is as good as mine. Nonetheless, it's notable that the president said it directly to Brian Moynihan on that stage, leading some to wonder sort of what the policies are going to be towards the banks in an environment, I think, which the market was by far giving the benefit of the doubt to these stocks, suggesting animal spirits, deal making, deregulation are all going to be positive. But is there a darker side of some of the policy that needs to be considered too, if these are going to be a target of the White House? Is that fair?
Yeah, so I don't think that should be a concern for investors. I'm going to pull you out of all that because I see how gingerly you were tiptoeing through the minefield.
I mean, I just want to say it for what it is. He said it.
Yes, there are no conservatives that couldn't get a loan while Joe Biden was president, and I guarantee you, if you were to somehow establish a data set that said these people are further to the right, how many loans did they get versus, I don't think there's anything there. But the optics are important. Trump is a reality TV producer at heart. He knows his audience. He understands the power of looking directly at one of the biggest bank CEOs in the country, making that statement. He knows they're going to lead with that on Fox News tonight, and he knows it's going to be all over social media. And it is effective insofar as it keeps the conversation going, promises made, promises kept. Does that relate to the earnings at Bank of America and Citi and JP Morgan? Probably not. I don't think they're going to have to do anything differently as far as how they make loans. The DEI stuff, you could argue maybe there are some expenses related to that maybe come out. That's possible. If you're an investor in these companies, this is not what you're worried about today.
Some are suggesting, our own Jeff Cox, for example, who covers the banks for CNBC.com, is pointing to a podcast in which Mark Andreessen, who obviously has a foot inside the White House in terms of these tech heavyweights who have made their way close to President Trump and the policies that may follow, was on Joe Rogan's podcast and claimed that the Biden administration and regulators in the administration had cut off tech and crypto companies from the financial system.
True.
So maybe that is what is specifically being referenced here in a roundabout way in the criticism directly to Brian Moynihan, who really didn't answer the question or respond to it specifically.
Because how do you respond? I mean, I think it's a silly thing to say, and I think this is a beautiful case in point of what our challenge as investors, as well as advisors who talk to our clients, is going to be for the next 4 years. And it goes right back to the previous 4 years. So as an investor, here's what I would do. If I were researching Bank of America and I was thinking about investing in it, I would put this in the category of pure noise, nothing I need to think about. That sentence would have zero impact on my investment process and how I was thinking about potentially investing in Bank of America. Separately, now I have a pain in the neck on my hands because we've got a pile of clients who are going to hear it and read it and like misinterpret it or think about it, overanalyze it, and say, do I want Bank of America in my portfolio? Do I not? I'm conservative. I'm not conservative. And that noise enters in. So I think this is the challenge of the next 4 years is when you hear lines like this, figuring out which bucket to put it in, noise, don't worry about it, or this is actually meaningful. I think I
agree with Scott, though. It's not noise as it pertains to crypto.
But but I think it's kind of baloney to conflate crypto with conservatism.
Right now it's not, but generally it is.
Right, because that's really just a regulatory, policy thing. Like that's, of the crypto people,
I will say this. I will say this.
Conservative versus liberal category?
There are some who do believe and who have made the case on that stage in Davos as well that the embracing of crypto by conservatives, including the president and those close to him, is one of the reasons why the Republicans were able to have the sweep that they did in the House and the Senate.
Undeniable.
So
Undeniable.
That's a fact, and that's out there because it's been said by people who do believe that is true, that you had a very punitive administration and a punitive SEC led by Gary Gensler as it relates to crypto that might have cost the Democrats votes in the prior election.
Well, Operation Checkpoint is real. Choke point is real. I think you just look at a couple of races. Look at how Sherrod Brown was tossed out of Ohio. That's purely crypto money coming in and swinging that election. So that's all real. But to Jenny's point, question is, what do you do with this from an equity investing standpoint? And the answer probably, unless we're talking about Coinbase and Robinhood and MicroStrategy, the answer is probably nothing.
We do know that he likes to play favorites. The only thing you could potentially extrapolate is maybe he's not playing favorites to Bank of America right now.
The other thing.
And what do you do with that?
The other thing that President Trump.
Neutral.
The other thing that President Trump said, as we bring in our senior economics reporter Steve Leisman, was this quote: "I will demand that interest rates drop immediately." Now, Steve, we have discussed leading into the election and, some of the, I don't want to say proposals because they're not official proposals, but some of the things that have been thrown out into the ether about a shadow Fed chair, perhaps, some wondering of what the relationship was going to be between Fed Chair Powell and President Trump, when the Fed is in itself at a sort of tricky point in its path here, trying to gauge what these new policies are going to mean for the path of inflation and figuring what all that means for the path of the Fed as it relates to interest rate cuts. What do you make of that comment that the president made? Quote, "I will demand that interest rates drop immediately"?
Well, I kind of woke up this morning thinking that the president had been through a lot of things and done a lot of what he said he was going to do on the campaign trail in terms of the emergency orders. And I said to myself, and the president starts to criticize the Fed in 3, 2, 1. And I thought this might be a day we might get that. It's kind of interesting, Scott. He had been somebody who was critical of the Fed, and some of the things that you talked about were discussed. And the president kind of stepped back from all that. And so I was thinking about our Fed survey, which we're in the field now, which last meeting came back and said, you know what? People thought that Trump was going to respect the independence of the Fed. And now I guess the pendulum has swung back. He can demand, let's be clear, nothing stops him from demanding, and there's nothing technically wrong with him basically jawboning the Fed. And I think the Fed expects that, Scott. I think with this president, they've come to the point where they know he's not going to be provide, I guess maybe you call it rhetorical independence. He's going to be out there saying what he thinks. But the notion, maybe the word demand, is one that's a little worrisome when it comes to the president of the United States.
But are you now thinking that you could have a greater battle over Fed independence because of statements like this from the president? I don't know how that issue in and of itself doesn't gain sort of a greater platform in the weeks, if not months ahead.
I think that's probably right. I will say personally, I didn't expect the president to back off from the idea of asking for, or I guess demanding, lower interest rates. That's, I think, who he is. It would be interesting to question him about that and say, Mr. President, inflation's running above target. What is it exactly you want the Fed to do? He's always a guy who has wanted lower interest rates, Scott. And I think you correctly point out that the huge number of changes that he plans to make in economic policy is a lot of the reason why the Fed is not hiking in response to this. It's just taking a step back and saying, let's see all this stuff work through. I've been through this a lot, Scott, as you know, and thinking about all of the elements of the president's plans. And there's questions about the impact of tariffs. There's questions about the impact of immigration. But there's also on the other side, if some of his things to help out business spending, they could help supply. And then there's this idea that Kevin Warsh and others have put forward that deregulation is a supply-side disinflationary impulse to the economy. And the Fed, I think, is going to step back and take a look at all this and try to account for it and figure it out whether or not it means higher growth or a higher neutral rate if that happens. And I think at this point, Scott, the only choice that Powell has is to take these comments on the chin. If the president demands lower interest rates, that's his right, but it's not the obligation of the Federal Reserve to provide them.
Do you want to also, before I let you go, take a stab at what the president said to Brian Moynihan? Because, you know, it's hard to figure out specifically what he is talking about. There are some suggestions, as I said, about debanking conservatives. There are said to be issues related to crypto. I mentioned Jeff Cox passing, some recent articles to me. 15 attorneys general last year sent a letter directly to Bank of America complaining about discrimination regarding politics and religion. So, rather than be outwardly and openly dismissive of what the president said as a lot of nothing, as long as there's a belief out there that there is an issue and that he confronted Brian Moynihan directly on that stage in Davos in front of world leaders and CEOs of global corporations, that it needs to be discussed, I think.
I find it remarkable, Scott, that Moynihan did not push back on the president. I am reading, Scott, the same thing that you are. It's not an issue that I covered at the time, back in April of 2024, and I'll read you from, I believe this is the a news release from the Attorney General of Virginia, Jason Myers, and he said, according to the letter, Bank of America has consistently discriminated against groups for political and religious reasons. The nation's second largest bank has denied service to gun manufacturers, fossil fuel producers, and contractors for U.S. immigration and customs enforcement. It also canceled the accounts of Christian ministry groups, saying one such group that trains pastors is, quote, operating a business type we have chosen not to service. So I have to say, Scott, these kind of allegations strike me as remarkable. I have to doubt their veracity, but somehow this has reached the presidential level. It's been leveled publicly at Bank of America. The Bank of America president or chairman did not respond back to it. So they are out there, and they are now for reporters to follow up on and figure out if these are accurate.
Yeah,
we'll see, by the way, if we get a statement from Bank of America and whether or not they responded to this in any way. I've not had a chance, I must say, to say what the B of A response is.
Yeah, it's gone global, as they say, because that's indeed what's happened. Steve, thanks. I appreciate you. That's Steve Leisman.
Pleasure.
On that issue. Can we, look, markets, Dow's up 256, S&P tried to get a new closing high yesterday, couldn't quite get there, but did hit a new intraday high. And the fact of the matter is there's just a lot of optimism about what is likely to happen, investors think, in the years to come because of the agenda that President Trump was going over in Davos. Industrials have been near a record high, so it hasn't only been all things tech. I do that to you because you bought Caterpillar. Best month since December of 2023. Why are you trying to get more exposure to industrials?
Well, this isn't a story that started last week when we bought Caterpillar. This was back to October when our number 3 and our number 5 holdings, Westinghouse Air Brake and United Rentals, we slashed them and leaned into tech. Now we're rotating back into industrials here. And what we really like about Caterpillar is China exposure. I mean, you're seeing industrial production last week in China, GDP.